Writer's Life, place where you get the sight, sound, smells, taste of my particular writer's life, where you get the truth about the writer's life, my truth anyway. Kind of like saying our democracy. So if you haven't already, subscribe, punch the like button, and hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss out on one single exciting video. And please don't forget, go to vinzandri.com, www.vinzandri.com, for all your thriller needs. And you can pick up the paperback to this one, the first book in the I have to remind myself, American Crime Story series. If you like Breaking Bad and Ozark, you're gonna love this. Hey, Big Philly, we got a very special guest today, Captain Frank Scalise of what PD in Oregon, Frank?
I was actually in Spokane,
right?
Washington. Yeah, Spokane, Washington.
Spokane, Washington. So Frank is the author of a ton of best-selling books. He's kind of like, I'm a little bit jealous because he's got that procedural market. That's his. Like, he owns it. And but you also do a lot of collaborations with one of, like, for instance, with one of my other favorite authors, Eric Beetner, and stuff like that. And Frank, I guess you're a full-time writer now, right? And you teach a little bit and give seminars, stuff like that?
Every once in a while. Yeah, just sort of a like give back sort of situation. It's not
right.
Intended as a moneymaker or anything like that.
Right.
So working with a library or bookstore or something along those lines. People who help me are well beyond my help, but there's other people who are a little bit newer in their journey, so to speak, and so I can offer a little bit of at least what my experience was to them. Right.
Now, how many names do you have? I'm calling you Frank Zafiro now, but I know that's an AKA, and I know your real name is Frank Scalise, and now you have like another series coming out, and you're going to be a Frank somebody else.
Yeah. I just the three right now.
Okay.
Frank Scalise is my real name. I've got more mainstream stuff under that name. I got a comedy, some hockey books for adults and kids, and then my main name is the Zafiro pen name. That's where most of the bulk of my books have come out under, and those are crime fiction of some iteration or another. Much like you, it's not a single subgenre.
Right.
And I grew up on fantasy and science fiction, and I haven't really written much of that in my life. And I'm finally at a point where I feel like I can without it, keeping me from doing other things as well. That's the beauty of being retired. So I thought that would be a little jarring, though, to write it under either one of those names. So I picked another pen name for fantasy and science fiction.
Right. All right. So you've been writing since you were like 13, right?
Yeah.
And what made you become a cop?
Well, even though I knew I wanted to be a writer, and that's how I identified, at my core, I'm a writer. I figured out pretty young that they don't just like ask you what you do and you say I'm a writer and somebody starts sending you checks.
Right.
Yeah. So I went into the army they do not back up the truck unless it's to repossess your furniture.
Oh my God.
So I went in the army to get money for college and
that's right. You're in Europe.
I kind of bide some time and get some life experience. And I was a linguist in the military. I learned how to speak Czech and spied on the communists until they became our friends. So it was a pretty good time to be there.
That must have been an awesome gig. Thank you for your service, by the way.
It was brief, 5 years.
So, and I read that today about you, that you were basically a spook. for lack of. I mean, that is so fucking cool. Like your stock. I've always liked your work, and we've known each other for a long time. I mean, I don't know if we probably met at a Thriller Fest or whatever, but like your stock in my book like went up like you got to tell me about being a spy in Czechoslovakia.
Well,
what was that like?
Yeah,
I mean, were you a ghost spy or?
Oh no!
Did you walk around in a military uniform and be like, "I'm a spy, come talk to me, or I'm going to shoot you in the head"?
No, you are far grander in your expectations than the truth is going to be. So, prepare to be disappointed. My stock it'll be a bear market again shortly.
Well, of course you're going to deny all the stuff you did. You're going to say, "Oh no, I was a pencil pusher, a paper pusher, and that's all I did."
No, I mean, I had kind of a cool job, but so I went to the Presidio of Monterrey, which is where the Defense Language Institute is at, and that's where they teach you a foreign language. Eh? And I had friends who took Russian, and it was also a 47-week course. Czech was a 47-week course. Polish was. Right. To give you an idea, the Spanish course was about 6 months, so it kind of gives you an idea on the complexity of the language.
Right.
And then you do another 8 weeks of Slovak after that, because it's something more than a dialect and less than another language entirely.
Right.
And then they send you to an Air Force base in Texas for technical top secret training.
Oh, cool.
Like
the weapons and stuff?
No, nothing like that. It's like I said, you're going to be disappointed. My job.
Oh, look at this. Look at this. It is common, compass, but if you open it up, pull a pin, it becomes bomb. It becomes bomb.
Dude, you're gonna be so disappointed.
Come on, Frank, give us some good stuff.
So
I need subscribers.
This is as good as it gets. My job was to put on headphones, sit at a position, and scan radio frequencies. Find where the Czech army was talking to each other, and they had some known frequencies that they did try to hide, and then they had others that they jumped around on, and intercept their transmission and do a quick summary style translation, just like, hey, they're talking about doing this, and then we send it back to the scribes to actually transcribe it verbatim. So I was a 98 Golf, which doesn't exist anymore. They changed how they do their MOS system in the Army, and it was called an interceptor operator. And so that was the job. It was to sit and listen. The interesting thing, I guess, is that, I mean, they spent like 24 or 26 months to train me, both in terms of regular Army training and then the language and then the interceptor stuff. And then they sent me to Germany to a unit that didn't have an interceptor mission. And so I got there and there's no interceptor mission. So I had to retrain as an analyst. And so what I did in that job was bits of intelligence would come in from a variety of different places, and it ended up on a desk, and we took shifts, and you take a look at all these disparate bits of information and you try to put together a more cohesive picture to brief the officers who are the decision makers on. So, and that was a 98 Charlie, they called it, an intelligence analyst. And that job actually helped me years later when I became a police lieutenant and was responsible for working with the crime analysis folks in terms of dealing with crime. And I discovered it was exactly the same kind of stuff. It's just that the structure and the information was the same, just the particulars would be different. But instead of enemy soldiers, it's criminals. Instead of, troop movements and supply movements and munitions and so forth, it's who's talking to who and what place got hit and these kinds of things. But overall, it was actually really helpful, and I was surprised at how much it helped me out, and it impressed the crime analysts, because I I essentially spoke their language, and they didn't usually get that from cops or from dumb lieutenants either. So I did that analyst stuff for about a year or so, and then did get transferred to the field station in Augsburg, which is down in Bavaria, outside of Munich, about 30-40 minutes outside Munich.
Right.
And
I know that area.
they did have an active interceptor mission there, so I did actually get to put on headphones and spy on the little Cheskies. And
See, you know, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you and Ian Fleming actually do share a similar background. He did much the same stuff.
Yeah.
Back in the 30s, you know, and 40s, much the same stuff, and that's how he came up with his character. And in fact, someone's chiming in. My buddy Big Philly, he wants to know, like, every evening and or morning when you went home to an apartment in East Germany, if Hot Blonde was waiting for you, getting ready to extract information from you, you know, in a way you could not resist.
Well, I did live in an apartment out on the economy rather than on the base, but that was because I was married at the time. So,
okay. Well, then
there were no red sparrows going on.
Right.
There were some interesting things that happened, though. I mean, not the least of which, of course, is that the Berlin Wall came down, the Vella Revolution happened in the Czech Republic. I mean, as I've said on more than one occasion, it was a fine time for freedom. But there were other interesting things that went on as well. I mean, some dumb, like, for instance, when the war in Kuwait started, they froze all terminations, all end of service term, ETSs is what they're called. So you basically got stop loss. You're in until they're done. They weren't going to lose anybody, and so that's why I ended up doing longer than the initial 4 years. So, but they didn't send us down to the Gulf or anything, and we weren't spying on the Czechs anymore because they were basically almost part of NATO by that time. I mean, in spirit, if nothing else. Right. I mean, to give you an idea, I was spying on these guys, and like a year later, they're sending NBC units down to support Operation Desert Storm. Okay. And so, there's some political whiplash right there,
Oh, sure.
So they had us, and again, we're military intelligence geeks, right? We're not like 11 bang bang, we're not soldiers in the strictest sense of the word.
Right.
So they got us working 6 days doing basically nothing. And then on our days off, we had to guard the field station because they were worried about terrorists. So we drive around in this van with M16s, but they wouldn't give us any ammunition. So we're driving around with empty M16s, supposedly guarding the field station.
That's FUBAR.
Oh, that is so. One of the reasons I didn't stay in the Army was because of things like that. And I would get in trouble because I would call bullshit on that, and then I'd be considered, I'm being insubordinate and and so forth. And I was like, oh, this is just bullshit. So the thing is, we ran into people, a couple of times who were taking photographs, and when we just held them there until the MPs came. But I got into an argument with my platoon sergeant one time, or actually the platoon sergeant, not my squad sergeant. Because I said we shouldn't be out here without weapons. What if somebody points a gun at us? What are we going to do? Fire back with harsh language? I mean, come on,
Yeah.
And he did not like that. So that was kind of dumb. But then I got out. The air war lasted all of 3 days, and then pretty much that was it. And they started letting people out. And I got out in March. That's how quickly they did that. And before I came home, I drove over into Czechoslovakia. So here's how surreal this is. I spent 4.5 years training and then to do so, and then spying on this country. And at the end of it all, I'm driving a Nissan Sentra with U.S. Army plates on it into the Czech Republic. Then it was still Czechoslovakia. And I'm driving past these road signs, and every road sign I'm seeing, like, oh yeah, the 20th Tank, battalion is there, and oh, that's where the 17th Motorized Rifle Division is stationed, and drove all the way to Polsen and hung out there for a couple of days and got a lot of side eye because people didn't know what to make of this, short-haired, obviously military guy who is American but speaks our language.
Right.
And, I like I told you, I was married at the time, and my then wife was pregnant and just barely. And so she wasn't feeling well and stayed back at the room one time. I went out for a walk. I ended up going into a crystal shop and Czechoslovak crystal. I didn't realize this until I got involved with the language, but it's like high-end, well-respected product. I mean, if you get Czech crystal, it's like, I don't know, it's like getting, Canadian hockey skates or something. So
the same in Russia. If you like the chandelier capital of the world is Moscow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I thought, hey, I'll get a nice, crystal set of goblets or whatever, or tumblers for somebody. I can't remember who. And I go in and I'm speaking in Czech. And at the time I was very fluent. I mean, I tested out at the level, the equivalent of a high school graduate native speaker is where, and I wasn't anything special. Most of my class did. I mean, we were well trained. And they used a system that's, I think, still in use. It's pretty widely used. It rates you between 1 and 5. And they have a plus minus on each side of each number as well. And then there's criteria for what you are. And a 3 is what I just described. You're the equivalent of a native speaker with high school education. A 4 would be like a professor, or 4 plus would be like a very well-spoken professor in the native language. So anyway, I go into this shop and there was a very pretty young Czech girl that was, she was like my age. I was like 22, and totally freaked out by the fact that I spoke good Czech and helped me out and everything. And then she started flirting really hard. so that's as close as I ever got. That's as close to a red sparrow as I ever encountered there. Obviously I didn't take her up on her flirtation other than to smile and be flattered. But it was surreal. It was surreal because, and I know we're of a similar age. Growing up, the specter of, World War III and war with Russia and the Warsaw Pact, it was a big part of our upbringing. And then I'm in the Army, and we're like expecting them to come through the Fulda Gap with T-72s at any moment. And then by the time I'm done, before I go home, I'm driving into, the country and staying at a little guest house and going out for, beer and a dinner at a tavern or whatever, and getting the side eye and all that. It was a very bizarre change, a very bizarre turn of events.
Right. I spent before the war. I spent I don't want to say considerable time, but I worked for RT, and so I spent time in Moscow and stuff like that. But I did go all through Ukraine, up to Chernobyl, Transnistria, Romania. The time I spent in Eastern Europe, I loved. It's very different.
Yeah,
it's very different.
I want to go back.
From Western Europe. Yeah, I've considered, maybe like I'm going back to Italy in December, but I'm like, I could easily live in Romania. I loved it that much. Just different vibe. And they know what it is. Everyone over there knows what it is to have lived under totalitarianism, and now they appreciate their freedom so much more. And it's kind of like the reverse of what's happening here, and it's disheartening. So I, for one, can't wait to get out. But that's for another story. Let me ask you another question.
Okay.
And by the way, somebody from overseas is saying hello to you.
Is that Greek? What is that?
Opa looks like Greek to me. The name looks Greek too.
No, the name is in Cyrillic. It's
that's not Cyrillic. It is in Cyrillic, right? Maybe Russian.
Prosty. Trying to remember. Is that is that a P? Isn't the N looking thing a P in Cyrillic, and then the P is an R, and the C is an S sound?
I went around Moscow with my producer every single day. Like, I'm sure she was assigned to me, right? Well, I worked for her at RT, but I didn't really learn. I mean, I learned a little Cyrillic while I was there, just the little letters and stuff like that. But on the subway, I would just count the stops, like instead of looking at exactly where I was. I don't know. So, and Big Philly loves one of your short stories.
Oh, great.
You got to go up a little bit.
No, I can see it here.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about short stories. One of the cool things about it in my River City series is that 4 of the entries are out of the 16 total are short story collections. And what's nice about that is you can go dive into a character that would never get any screen time in one of the novels.
Oh, I agree. Yes.
Them, their starring role, or you can dive into something about a main character that would never get examined either,
right?
And play with that. And so I really enjoy that.
That's right. I actually have a couple guys that are like show up sometimes in my novels, but via the short story form, I can focus on them, in a single event, and it's a lot of fun. Since this is the writer's life, what's your writing day like, Frank?
It's I'm up in the morning. My wife's a teacher, so I've experimented with getting up as early as 5, as late as 6:30. It's always pretty much somewhere in there, depending on what experiment I'm running with. She's been getting up so she can have some sit and drink coffee and reflect on being live sort of time in the morning. So she'll get me up after that first cup of coffee if I'm already up. And I get my coffee up. Huh?
Frank, get up. You got it right.
Yeah. Well, I do. I grab that first cup and
the Scalises are fighting again.
Luckily, our neighbors are old and deaf, so we don't have to.
Oh, then if you're lucky, then you can fight all you want. No, I'm sure you guys.
Yeah, we don't. That's one thing, we don't really fight. I mean, we've never had a bang up fight, and even when we argue, it's pretty infrequent and pretty short lived. Part of it's me. I don't like that. I'm fine with conflict. I don't like having bad vibes between us, though. So I tend to say, let's figure this out. But what's
the most dangerous situation a law enforcement officer can face? I say as I have my trooper T-shirt on, New York State Trooper T-shirt. Domestic.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
In responding to.
Yeah, responding to a domestic dispute.
Yeah, because emotions are high, and so are the
there's firearms.
People's they know they're home and you don't, and there's all kinds of reasons why that's true. Absolutely. Right. But anyway, I'll end up grabbing a cup of coffee and coming in here and getting to work fairly early, and and if I'm in the middle of a project, then I tend to be pretty focused on that. I'll put in a lot of time on it. If I'm in between projects, for a few days or a week, I'll focus more on editing and marketing and taking care of my website and things like that. But, I've got so much stuff queued up that, I need to dive in pretty much every day. So it's not a task. It's like, I get to go play in this sandbox. You know what I mean?
That's exactly it. Troy Lambert and I were. And Troy Lambert says hi, by the way. We were talking about this exact thing yesterday, that this isn't really work, folks. This is something that we would do if we were retired. And you happen to be retired, but I've been retired for 25 years. You know what I mean? Sort of. Except I did.
Are you doing the Travis McGee? Or are you taking your retirement in installments?
Yes. I'm taking my early retirement when I turn 62. I'm taking the Social Security, if it exists at that point. I'm not even sure it's going to exist in 2 years. Of course, they'll probably print the money. It'll probably exist, but it'll be worth half of what it is now, or something like that. But anyway, that remains to be seen. But you know, it's just I've seen in the 25 years I've been doing it full time. It's just I only went back to work twice, both for 6-month periods, because I was like flat broke, and both times I had like both times I had my second wife and I had a baby, and so it was like I need to bring in some money, right? And the first time, and this was me just asking my father had a construction company, and so you know he's like, all right, yeah, you can come back to work, all right, for a little while. I did that, and then something good happened again, and I'm like, well, I don't need it. So, and he's like, all right, whatever. Then the second time around, he's like, oh, well, I think this time maybe you're going to stay and take over the company, whatever. And I had no intention to do that. And I didn't mean to deceive him, but like, it got to the point where I was like staying home on Fridays to write or whatever. And he's like, so he just called me and he said, you're fired. You know, go back to writing full time. It'll work out. And it was the best thing he could have ever done. So out of those 25 years, I worked basically 1 year at a job, and that was it. But I do find there are stellar years where I am just like, you know, like totally in the green. And I'm sure you go through the same thing, but, and then there are years it's like, holy crap, how am I going to pay the rent this month? You know, it just is, that's the nature of the beast. It's the same with, I guess it's probably the same with musicians, the same with movie makers. I'll tell you a story. The guy who wrote Saving Private Ryan, his brother lived in the building next door to me. And we got talking, and he said, oh, yeah, his newest movie, this was a couple years ago now, and he said, like, I'm not going to mention his name, but his newest movie was like The Kursk. You can actually watch it on Netflix. I don't know if it's, you know, like the sinking of the Kursk or the, you know, but it revolves around that Russian submarine that went down. And it's a great movie. It's fantastic. And it's got a stellar cast, the whole bit, just like Private Ryan. But not even movie theaters picked it up. Don't ask me why. And so it ended up just going straight to video. And now here's the writer of Private Ryan, right? You know, Spielberg. And his brother was telling me, he's like, he's been having to pay his mortgage with like credit cards. I was like, and he explicitly called me and said, don't tell mom I'm doing this, you know, and he's like 62 years old, you know, but that's just the nature of the beast, you know?
Yeah, it's a landscape that's more like a seascape because it's constantly changing.
Excellent.
And,
yes.
You know, stuff that worked a year and a half ago doesn't work right now.
Right.
You know,
algorithms change.
Yeah, the smart way to go isn't looking quite as smart at the moment. You know, that kind of thing happens pretty frequently. I had to, you know, I'm fortunate in that I retired from law enforcement.
You have a pension, right?
And I was able, you know, not immediately because I retired at 45, but since I turned 50, I've been able to draw my pension.
Oh, good.
And you know, if I needed to, my wife and I health insurance would be a bit of a bear, but we
Right.
could live on my pension.
Sure.
I mean, and she's teaching, and we have health insurance through her being a teacher.
Right.
And so my writing career is, you know, I don't want it to not turn a profit, but how much of a profit it turns is immaterial to our financial well-being. Now, obviously, if I hit it big, we'd be doing a lot of traveling, and it'd be great. But I mean, I don't have to worry about making the mortgage payment based on my sales, which is a good thing because they ebb and flow, like you say.
Right.
And I had to just kind of divorce myself from giving too much credence to sales at the expense of remembering why I'm doing this in the first place.
That's right.
And I'm doing it because I have stories to tell, and I want to share those stories. And if I start worrying about, oh, well, Vincent Zandri sold 3 times as many books as I did on this month, or why did he win this award, or how come everybody's talking about his book on Twitter?
That'll drive you freaking nuts.
Can't do it, or even just comparing myself to myself. How
Right.
come, I mean, I'm down 90% from this time last year, or I'm only up a tiny bit.
Right.
I can't let that be the motivator, because if I do, then it sucks all the joy out of it. And the
Right.
reality is that's what I'm here for.
That's right. And I think I still say, no matter how things change, it still comes down to the amount of time you spend in the chair writing the stories that you love to write, no matter whether they're going to sell or not. And in the end, it's I consider myself a pulp fiction writer. Like, I just churn it out and churn it out and churn it out. One clean draft, that's it, and it goes to the copy editor. I don't use a developmental editor unless it's a traditionally published book, and then they usually fuck that up. But I'm going more and more independent. I think that's where the money is. But it's still, to me, a matter of, like, if you have 200 intellectual properties, be they just a short story, a novelette, a novella, a novel, even if you sell one or two of each per month, it all adds up to a nice little chunk of change. I think it was Dean Wesley Smith, who's a hero of mine and a friend. He and his wife, Kristen Catherine Rush, who's also a pulp writer, they said that at one point they were in debt almost to the tune of $500,000, and they got themselves out of it, not by, like, getting jobs or real jobs or anything like that. Not that this isn't, whatever. But they wrote their way out of it, and that's how they did it. They just sat their asses in the chair and they just wrote their way out of it. And I like that.
That's pretty incredible. Yeah, that's a great story.
I mean, it's $500,000, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine feeling like if I don't get this book done, and if it doesn't sell a certain amount, then we're not eating, or we're eating mac and cheese, or we're not,
Right.
We're going to have to be late on the mortgage payment. I mean, that's
right.
That's, if you can do that, then more power to you.
Sure.
I never want to get to a position where I'm resentful of being in the chair. I want to feel, that joy every time I sit down. And
Absolutely.
I mean, like, if you went back to when I was 13 years old and pulled little Frankie aside and said, "Hey, guess what? You're going to do a bunch of stuff in your life, but by the time you're 45, you're going to be able to sit in a chair and write stories all day, and that'll be your job, and you can do whatever you want."
Absolutely.
I would have been over the moon. I would have been.
Yep.
That's my dream.
Right. Absolutely. But you have another question. I know we're running a little late, and I'm taking a lot of your time.
No,
but we have another question.
You
actually have a question from a colonel in the New York State Police, or she's retired now, but she says she's tuning in late. But Frank, did you find it hard going from law enforcement to writer, full-time writer?
I didn't. And that question could be taken two different ways. I didn't have a problem doing it, in that I always felt like I was a writer. That's how I saw myself. So even when I was a soldier, I was a writer who was a soldier. When I was a cop, I was a writer who was a cop. And it doesn't mean I didn't thoroughly embrace the roles I was in. I most certainly did, and identified strongly with them. But I never felt like I was transitioning to becoming a writer. It was more like I was being able to write and be my truest self, and bring these other pieces of my life experience into that element to it. So, the hardest part maybe was just trying to decide where to draw certain lines. I mean, when I was still on the job, I took this pen name and changed Spokane to River City to give myself a little distance, so that if the bosses thought I was writing something too gritty, they couldn't say, "Stop it," because it's not Frank Scalise, it's this other guy who's just a Pacific Northwest police officer. But there's another way to take that question, and that is, once you retire, that transition to being a full-time writer is that difficult, you know? And the reality is when you leave something you've done for a couple of decades, and policing is a high intensity couple of decades, so however long you're in it, it feels longer in a good and a bad way because of how much intensity there is, at least periodic intensity. And there's also, much like you might get in the military or in sports or in businesses with a good culture, there's such camaraderie that you're part of in law enforcement. And when you leave that, that is a transition for sure.
Right.
And what I'm happy to report is that the camaraderie amongst at least crime fiction authors is not the same, but similar. And they're a pretty welcoming bunch. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you. This is your show. So, I mean, that's a pretty good indicator right there. So if you're, trying to transition to writing and it's not something you've done a lot, then obviously I would encourage you to, go after learning those basics and surround yourself with other writers who can help you in that way. If you already feel like you're solid on writing, but you're more thinking about, what's the transition like? It's wonderful and rocky at the same time. I mean, I still miss the camaraderie that I had on the job. And sometimes you can, I went back for a retirement party a few years ago, and it was absolutely wonderful to see those folks again. And you pick up right where you left off, and there's so much love in the room. It was great. But much like the saying goes, you also can't really go home again. I mean, you're never going to completely recapture it. And, I don't spend a lot of time reading the newspaper from where I used to live in Spokane. But if I do see an article in there with a police angle to it, unless they're talking about the chief who I knew, or a few other high-ranking folks that I came up with, there's maybe a 50-50 shot at best that I'll know what cop they're talking about when they write the person's name in the article. And it used to be I knew every single person, personally, like, and not just their names, but I had some kind of at least a passing relationship with them. And now it's 50-50 whether I even heard of the guy or the gal. So, the world moves on, and it moves on without us.
Right. It's funny because the person, Gold Patrol 727, which, by the way, is an excellent life coaching platform. Just go to Gold Patrol 727. There's a little shilling for her. She's still very much involved emotionally because she's newly retired, but she's still even though she has a new life, she's still very much emotionally attached to the job, I've noticed. And it's taken her a while to like completely remove herself emotionally, even sort of physically from it. So, I mean, you guys put your life on the line all the time. She has some great stories. In fact, I'm writing a story now. It's a short Tick Moonlight thing about when she was young, she had to investigate a guy who died on the train tracks. Somebody obviously put him there or whatever when he was drunk, and he heard the locomotive coming, and he sat up, and so like he must have been like, "Tell me I'm dreaming," All I could just picture was him saying like, "Oh shit," and then boom, and she said he literally disintegrated from like the waist up, like just disintegrated. But anyway, be that as it may, I'm sure. How much do you rely on your experiences, be they violent, be they just dramatic, emotional, from the cop job for your fiction? Because I notice, here I am interrupting you just as you're about to form your. Like you're the only guy I know. I mean, you're the only guy I know. Like you can start your story off with like, they called him we got a 272 over in Spokane, I don't know any of that stuff, right? And so I skip it. But you, with such knowledge, you can, how a cop reacts to that. Whereas, like, if this were TV, it'd be very exciting if it were, robbery in progress or shooting in progress. But you even have your female character say something like, this was at one point her blood would have boiled or something like that, but now she's just like, it's routine, So how much of that
true.
affect your fiction?
I would say that I draw very, very heavily on the experiences that I had. And one of the benefits of being in leadership role is that, you do the job for a period of time at the line level. And so you know what it's like in the trenches, and you have that experience. And it might not be as deep as, say, somebody who's a patrol officer their entire career, or a detective for 20 years or something. Their depth of knowledge outstrips mine, no question. But
Right.
I can go a little bit deep into the job that they did and be accurate. But then you get an opportunity in command positions to be in command of units that you may never have been part of if you had remained a line member. For example, when I became a lieutenant, my first ancillary duty was I was also assigned command of the canine unit.
Right.
Well, I was never a canine handler. I love the dogs. I'm a dog person. But I don't think I could have passed the running test. They run a ton.
Right.
Not the dogs, the handlers,
I
And
did an article on them once.
yeah, well, then
Yeah, it was very, very physical.
Extremely physical, and also we didn't have a lot of turnover because it's a very it's an elite position. It's a very desirous position, and people stick in it for as long as they possibly can. So the opportunity to even do it is not very often. But here I am, boom, here's your bar, and now congratulations, Lieutenant. Oh, now you're in command of this unit that you were never an operator in. So I learned right away that you have to approach those roles with a great deal of humility and a desire to learn. And when they see that in you, they will teach you everything. And so I learned a ton about the canine unit. And part of it was for my own selfish reasons. I wanted to know. But I also felt like it was my duty, because when you're in the leadership role, your job is to make sure that the people doing the job have everything they need to be able to do that job.
Right.
Secondarily, it's making sure they actually do the job, but that's not your primary role. Your primary role is to make it possible for them to do the job. And if I understand their job well enough to go tell my boss why we need to buy a new dog and start training it now, even though we're 2 years out from retiring this dog, I better be able to speak to that with some sort of knowledge, rather than, I don't know, Vincent told me and he's the handler. That's not going to work. And
Right.
so it was kind of partially duty and partially interest, and ultimately not part of my plan, but as it turns out, creating a well of knowledge that I was able to draw upon when I was writing. Same thing happened with the SWAT team. Same thing happened with other units, the homicide unit, a bunch of other units that I was fortunate enough to command at one level or another and learn about. And so while my depth of knowledge in any one of these specific areas is nowhere near as deep as the actual practitioner who that's their career. I mean, I'm not going to tell you I know more than a homicide detective who's a career homicide detective. That's no way, not even close. I'm single A ball, their major league, but I'm still a ball player. I still understand
Sure.
how pitches work. I know what a bat is, and so
Right.
that's an awkward analogy, but I think you get what I'm saying. And so that was kind of the neat thing about that. I was able to draw on all of that when I started writing. However, in only a very few instances did I draw one for one on an experience that was related in a book or a story pretty close to how it actually occurred. Maybe 99% of the time, that's not the case. It's the flavor, it's the texture, it's the sound, it's the vibe, it's all of that, but the details aren't the same. Maybe 1 or less than 1% of the time, I did do a one-to-one situation there, and a couple of times with permission because it was not my experience. I mean, I had a detective who gave me a couple of funny lines that you can use this in one of your books, and
Yeah,
so
we all get that.
I would do that.
Right,
But they were
right.
actually pretty good lines, so I used them.
Good.
Took me like 10 years, but I did use them. So I would say, I draw directly on it quite a bit, but it's not, if people recognize themselves, it's because I did a good job of creating a real looking character, not because I was writing about them.
Right. That's incredible, because I'm sure you have you've done so much. Frank, you have to come back, because I feel like we've just touched upon your life. I mean, what do you like, 50, 51? I mean,
double nickel, baby.
double nickels on the dime.
I can't drive it, but I can be it.
Yep, that's right. You cops, man. The way you drive, this Gold Patrol, for instance, yeah. She does 100 in the left lane. Company car. Jesus. Yeah. I'm like, slow down.
It was so dumb. It was so dumb too, because you just get used to driving fast. I mean, and everybody starts on graveyard, almost everybody. And so your traffic situation is negligible. And so you can drive 10 over and nobody even notices, I mean, right. Everybody else is too, pretty much, and it's not a big deal. And then of course you just get used to driving fast and then responding to things. And then all of a sudden you're driving fast off duty. And then, and you live in the city. So, probably there's not a chance in hell you're going to get a ticket for driving 12 over. So you just do. And looking back on it's like, why was I doing that? It just was increasing my possibilities of getting into a crash or something. And then, then you're hung, because there's no, so, but you're young and you're dumb and you do dumb things. I did plenty of them.
Yeah. I hang out at a couple of bars I hang out at. Well, I don't really hang out much anymore because I can't do it like I used to, but a couple of bars I hang out at are cop bars. And they're good guys, but they kind of look at me like, you write crime fiction? Like, I know it's going to be bullshit, but it's my version of a cop story anyway, for entertainment's sake. Philly, Frank, where can the thriller-loving public find your grifter song series, of which I'm a part of, I'm proud to say? Where can they find all your stuff?
Easiest place is my website, frankzafiro.com, and then obviously on Amazon and BookBub and these places, that'll start you out. And the Grifter Song series is published by Down Out Books, so you could go to their website there as well.
All right, great talking to you. Will you promise you'll come back?
Oh, hey, anytime, man. I enjoyed the hell out of it. Anytime.
Wow, you're a very interesting character. Ladies and gentlemen, the spy, Frank Zafiro.
Yeah, I told you you'd be disappointed.
No, I'm not disappointed at all, because you're not telling me half of the truth. And so I do have a couple more stories. Get it out of you, Frank. I will get it out of you. I promise. All right, everybody, this is it. This was a great episode. I had so much fun. I will see you guys. Tomorrow's going to be Friday. I don't have a guest tomorrow. I will see you guys either Friday or Sunday. And next up, I think we have Robin Catalano, not till the 16th, but I have influencer genius Tony Newton on Sunday at 1:00 Eastern Standard Time. I'll remind everybody. All right, everybody, I will talk to you later. Frank, I'll talk to you later. And everybody else, thank you for chiming in. And